Derek Vaughn had seen his fair share of chaos in his career as a U.S. Marshal. He had chased fugitives across state lines, handled high-stakes operations, and faced down criminals who would make most people's blood run cold. But when he finally decided to settle down in a quiet suburban neighborhood, he never expected the real battle to come from a homeowners association. The neighborhood seemed like the perfect escape from his high-pressure job. Beautifully manicured lawns, pristine sidewalks, and homes that all looked like they had been plucked straight from a real estate magazine. On the surface, it was the kind of place where families thrived. Neighbors greeted each other with warm smiles, and everything functioned in perfect harmony. But perfection often comes at a price. Within days of moving in, Derek started noticing the unspoken rules that governed the community. There were rules about everything: where you could park, how often your grass needed trimming, even the exact shade of white your fence had to be. At the head of this rigid operation was Karen Whitman, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. Karen wasn't just any HOA president. She ruled with an iron fist, enforcing regulations with a level of obsession that made Derek's training in law enforcement seem mild in comparison. She was in her late 50s, her blonde hair always styled to perfection. Her wardrobe a rotating selection of power suits that screamed authority. But beneath the polished exterior lurked a woman who thrived on control, and Derek Vaughn was about to become her next target. At first, it was little things: a passive-aggressive note about his mailbox being an inch too high, a warning about his trash bins not being rolled in within the acceptable time frame. Derek brushed it off, assuming she was just a stickler for the rules. But as the days passed, it became clear that Karen wasn't just enforcing regulations. She was testing him, waiting to see if he would bow to her authority like the rest of the neighborhood. But what Karen didn't know was that Derek Vaughn had spent his entire career dealing with people who thought they were untouchable, and he had no intention of letting a power-hungry HOA president push him around. This neighborhood had secrets, and Derek was about to uncover them all. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. It started with a letter. A crisp white envelope tucked neatly into Derek Vaughn's mailbox, stamped with the bold insignia of the Homeowners Association. At first glance, it seemed like a routine notice, just another piece of paper in the bureaucratic machine that kept the neighborhood running. But when Derek opened it, he quickly realized it was the beginning of something far more sinister. Violation Notice, 9011. Your mailbox exceeds the HOA regulation height limit of 42 inches. You have 7 days to correct this issue or face a fine of $150. Derek frowned as he reread the letter. He had installed the mailbox himself, carefully measuring it to meet the community's exact standards. There was no way it was out of compliance. Annoyed but not yet alarmed, he grabbed a measuring tape, stepped outside, and confirmed what he already knew. His mailbox was exactly 42 inches tall, not an inch more, not an inch less. He shrugged it off, chalking it up to a clerical error, and decided to ignore it. But a week later, another letter arrived. Violation Notice. HOA 2. Your driveway exceeds the allowable length as per HOA guidelines. Failure to comply will result in a $200 fine. Derek clenched his jaw. His driveway was the same length as every other house on his street. He had checked when he first moved in. He had even reviewed the HOA bylaws before purchasing the home, ensuring everything was in order. This was starting to feel personal. Still, he gave the HOA the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was another mistake. Maybe Karen and her board were just overzealous about upholding the rules. But then the third letter came. Violation. Notice Nagar 003. Your backyard garden does not meet the HOA's aesthetic standards. Remove all non-compliant plants immediately or face a $500 penalty. That was the last straw. Derek's garden was small, neatly arranged, and filled with a few tomato plants, some herbs, and a couple of rose bushes. It was hardly an eyesore. If anything, it was one of the tidiest in the neighborhood. He knew this wasn't about regulations, it was about control. Karen was testing him, pushing him, waiting to see how far she could go before he caved. But Derek Vaughn wasn't the type to cave. Instead of complying, he decided to confront Karen directly. He walked down the pristine sidewalks, past rows of identical houses, until he reached the HOA office, a small, whitewashed building that looked more like a corporate headquarters than a community center. Inside, Karen sat behind a polished oak desk, sipping from a porcelain teacup. Her expression was calm, composed, like she had been expecting him. "Mr. Vaughn," she said with a practiced smile. "How can I help you?" Derek placed the violation notices on her desk, his movements deliberate. "I want to know why I'm getting fined for things that are completely within regulation." Karen glanced at the papers, then folded her hands neatly in front of her. "Our community maintains a certain standard, Mr. Vaughn. If we allowed everyone to interpret the rules however they pleased, things would fall into chaos." Derek narrowed his eyes. "I'm not interpreting anything. My mailbox is 42 inches. My driveway is standard length. And my garden—" He exhaled sharply. "There's nothing in the bylaws about gardens." Karen's smile didn't waver. "Some rules are unwritten. We expect residents to follow the spirit of the guidelines, not just the letter." Derek knew exactly what this was. Karen had seen plenty of new homeowners come through this neighborhood, people who bent to her authority, who paid their fines without question, who fell in line like obedient sheep. But she had never dealt with someone like him. "I follow the law," Derek said, his voice even but firm. "And the law says you can't fine me for things that aren't actual violations." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She knew he was right. But she also knew she had the power to make his life miserable. "We'll see about that," she murmured, scribbling something onto a notepad. Derek left the office knowing this was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, the fines kept coming, one after another, each more absurd than the last. He was fined for having his trash bins out 5 minutes past collection time, for not seeking approval before replacing a porch light, for parking his truck in his own driveway instead of inside the garage. It was harassment, plain and simple. But what Karen didn't know was that Derek Vaughn wasn't just another homeowner. He was a U.S. Marshal. And if she wanted a war, she had just picked the wrong man to mess with. Derek Vaughn had dealt with criminals, con artists, and liars in his career as a U.S. Marshal. But Karen Whitman was proving to be in a league of her own. What had started as petty fines and fabricated violations had now escalated into something far more dangerous, a calculated attack designed to strip him of his home. It began with whispers. Neighbors who had once given him polite nods now avoided eye contact. Conversations would abruptly stop when he walked past. Something was off. Then came the official HOA complaint letters. "Multiple residents have reported your loud and disruptive behavior. Concerns have been raised about your property, diminishing the community's value. Ongoing disturbances have created an uncomfortable environment for your neighbors." Derek frowned as he read through the notices. Not once had he blasted loud music, thrown wild parties, or done anything that could be considered disruptive. His job demanded discipline and order. He wasn't the kind of man to cause chaos. But according to these letters, he was now the neighborhood menace. That same week, an elderly neighbor he had spoken to only once left a note on his door. "I don't know what's going on, but I never filed a complaint. Something isn't right." Derek's jaw tightened. Karen was faking complaints. It was a tactic he had seen before. Fabricate enough concerns, build a case, and use it as leverage. But leverage for what? He didn't have to wait long to find out. A week later, another letter arrived. This one stamped in bold red ink. Urgent notice. Non-compliance hearing scheduled. Due to repeated violations and resident complaints, a special HOA hearing has been scheduled to determine further action regarding your property. Potential consequences include legal action and foreclosure. Foreclosure. Derek sat in his kitchen, gripping the letter, his pulse steady but his mind racing. That was the endgame. Karen wanted him gone. And now she had manufactured enough evidence to justify it. But she had made a mistake. She had underestimated who she was dealing with. Derek knew that organizations like the HOA had to follow a paper trail. If Karen was manipulating records, there would be proof. It was just a matter of finding it. He started with the bylaws, digging through every document, every amendment, every obscure clause the HOA had in place. What he found was a pattern. Over the last 5 years, at least 3 other homeowners had been forced out under similar circumstances: manufactured complaints, sudden fines, foreclosure threats, and then within weeks of losing their homes, those properties had been resold. Cheap, often to board members or people with close ties to Karen. She wasn't just running an HOA, she was running a racket. Using his law enforcement contacts, Derek pulled records on property transfers and transactions linked to the HOA. His suspicions were confirmed. The pattern was undeniable. Homes were being taken under false pretenses and funneled to insiders at a fraction of their value. And now, he was their next target. Derek arrived unannounced at the HOA board meeting the following evening. The so-called non-compliance hearing had been scheduled without his input, held in a private community center room with only board members present. They hadn't expected him to show up. Karen, sitting at the head of the table, looked up with feigned surprise. "Mr. Vaughn, this is a closed meeting." Derek stepped forward, tossing a thick folder onto the table. "Then it's about to be wide open." The board members shifted uncomfortably as he flipped through documents: fraudulent complaints, suspicious property sales, and financial records linking Karen's closest allies to a web of real estate transactions. "This is what you've been doing, isn't it?" Derek continued, his voice calm but cutting. "You manufacture violations, push people out, and flip their homes for profit. And you think you can do the same to me." Karen's expression hardened. "You don't have proof." Derek pulled out one last piece of paper, a notarized affidavit from a former board member who had turned against her. "I do now." The room fell silent. Karen's fingers curled into the edge of the table, but she forced a smile. "This is all a misunderstanding." Derek leaned in, his voice lowering. "You don't get to decide that." The tides had turned, and Karen knew it, but she wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. Derek Vaughn had faced down armed fugitives, navigated dangerous standoffs, and spent years enforcing the law against people who thought they were above it. But Karen Whitman wasn't wielding a gun. She was wielding power. A power built on intimidation, deceit, and a network of hand-picked loyalists who had turned the HOA into their own personal kingdom. And she was about to learn that Derek didn't back down. The next morning, Derek walked into the HOA office with a thick folder of documents in hand. Karen sat behind her polished oak desk, as always, sipping from a cup of tea as if she hadn't spent the past month trying to destroy his life. She barely glanced up. "Back again, Mr. Vaughn? I do hope you've come to settle your outstanding violations." Derek didn't sit. Instead, he placed the folder on her desk and flipped it open. Inside were the official HOA bylaws, highlighted and bookmarked, along with copies of his compliance records. "I've read every line of your rulebook, Karen," Derek said, his voice even but firm. "And I've followed every single one of these regulations to the letter." He pointed to a section underlined in red. "You claim my driveway is too long? The HOA's own blueprints say otherwise. My mailbox height? Exactly within limits. My garden? There's nothing in the bylaws restricting private vegetable gardens. Karen raised an eyebrow, a slow, amused smile spreading across her face. You've certainly done your homework. Derek leaned in. This means every single fine you've hit me with is invalid. You're not enforcing rules, you're making them up. Karen chuckled and leaned back in her chair. You think the rules matter, Derek? She said smoothly. The board backs my decisions, and the board decides what's valid. Derek's hands clenched into fists at his sides. That board is made up of your friends. They rubber stamp every move you make. Exactly, Karen said with a smirk. Which means if we vote to foreclose on your home, it happens. If we say you're a nuisance, you are. And if we say you violated the bylaws, she gestured around the office, then that's reality. Derek exhaled slowly, tamping down the anger rising inside him. You're playing a dangerous game, Karen. Karen tilted her head, feigning sympathy. And you're a man fighting a battle he can't win. Derek had seen enough. He gathered, his documents turned on his heel and walked out. Karen thought she had him cornered, but she had just made a critical mistake. She had underestimated how far he was willing to go to bring her down. That night Derek sat at his desk, his laptop open, HOA financial records spread around him. He had already uncovered the pattern of forced foreclosures and suspicious property sales, but now he suspected something deeper. The HOA had money, a lot of money. Homeowners were required to pay hefty dues. Fines were being issued left and right, and yet the community's maintenance had been inconsistent. The roads had cracks. The playground equipment was old. Security cameras in public areas barely worked. So where was the money going? Derek started digging into the HOA's financial reports, searching for discrepancies. It didn't take long to find them. There were payments listed for repairs that had never been made, funds allocated to vendors that didn't seem to exist, large sums marked as miscellaneous expenses with no explanation. And the biggest red flag of all, recurring transfers to a private account under the name Whitman Holdings. Derek's eyes narrowed. Karen hadn't just been manipulating rules to push people out. She had been embezzling HOA funds for years. With each new document he uncovered, the picture became clearer. Karen was running the HOA like a personal slush fund, using it to funnel money into fake contracts and siphon off cash for herself and her inner circle. This wasn't just HOA corruption. This was fraud, and Derek had just found the proof he needed to take her down. Derek Vaughn had faced enemies who were dangerous, desperate, and cunning. But Karen Whitman was something else entirely. She was arrogant. She truly believed she was untouchable. That was her biggest weakness. And now, she had just made her final, most reckless move. The envelope arrived early in the morning, slid under Derek's front door like a silent threat. No postage, no warning, just a thick stack of legal-looking documents stamped with the HOA's insignia. Notice of foreclosure. Due to repeated non-compliance and outstanding fines totaling $38,750, the HOA has initiated foreclosure proceedings against your property. A hearing will be held in 14 days to finalize the sale. Derek exhaled slowly as he read through the papers. He wasn't surprised. He had expected Karen to escalate. But even for her, this was bold. She was skipping the usual legal red tape, trying to fast-track the process before he had time to react. The amount was laughable. Nearly $40,000 in bogus fines conjured out of thin air. This wasn't just an abuse of power. It was outright fraud. Karen was betting that he would panic, that he'd scramble for a lawyer, fight a battle in court he couldn't afford, or maybe even pack up and leave before it got worse. But Derek had no intention of running. He placed the notice on his kitchen table, took a deep breath, and reached for his phone. It was time to strike back. Derek didn't have to dig far to find out what Karen was planning next. That same evening, he received a call from a friend inside the county records office. "She's already scheduled an HOA auction for your house," the voice on the other end said. "It's not even officially foreclosed yet, but she's pushing it through like it's a done deal." Derek's jaw tightened. He had seen this before. Corrupt HOAs running sham foreclosures, flipping homes for pennies on the dollar to people within their inner circle. And sure enough, when he checked the list of approved bidders for the upcoming auction, it was filled with familiar names, Karen's closest allies, including her own husband listed as a potential buyer. She wasn't just trying to take his home. She was trying to steal it for herself. Derek had all the proof he needed. The only thing left was to wait. He wasn't just going to stop the foreclosure. He was going to bring the whole operation down. Karen Whitman had spent years manipulating homeowners, twisting the rules in her favor, and silencing anyone who dared to challenge her authority. She believed she was untouchable. That belief was about to shatter. Derek Vaughn spent the next few days making calls, pulling favors, and using every resource at his disposal. Being a U.S. Marshal didn't just mean enforcing the law. It meant knowing how to investigate, how to dig deep, and how to find the truth when someone was trying to bury it. His contacts in financial crimes helped him verify what he already suspected. Karen wasn't just abusing HOA power. She was running a full-scale financial scam. The records told a damning story. Falsified contractor payments, money meant for neighborhood improvements funneled into Karen's personal accounts. Wire fraud. Large, unexplained transfers to Shell, companies linked to her family. Tax evasion. Unreported revenue from HOA fines that conveniently never made it into official records. It wasn't just fraud. It was federal fraud. Derek now had everything he needed to bring her down, and he was going to do it in front of her entire board. The next HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread fast that Derek's foreclosure case was on the agenda, and the neighborhood had turned out in force. People whispered among themselves, wondering if he'd finally give in, or if Karen had finally met her match. Karen sat at the head of the long conference table, her expression smug as she glanced toward Derek. "Mr. Vaughn," she said smoothly, "you've been called here to finalize the foreclosure proceedings on your property. Do you have anything to say before we move forward?" Derek stood, calm and collected. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather badge holder, flipping it open to reveal his U.S. Marshal credentials. The room fell silent. Karen's smirk faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Flashing a badge isn't going to change the fact that you're in violation of HOA policies." Derek tilted his head. "You're right, Karen. The badge isn't why I'm here." He dropped a thick stack of papers onto the table, his voice steady but firm. "This is why I'm here." Karen hesitated before reaching for the documents. As she flipped through them, the color drained from her face. Bank statements proving money was funneled into private accounts, emails linking her to illegal property flips, financial reports showing unaccounted funds, millions over the years. The other board members leaned in, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock. One of them, a nervous-looking man who had always seemed uncomfortable around Karen, spoke up. "Karen, what is this?" Karen forced a laugh, but it sounded strained. "This is nonsense," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "This is just some desperate attempt to—" Derek cut her off. "It's wire fraud. It's tax evasion. It's felony-level embezzlement. And I don't think the IRS or the Department of Justice will appreciate being lied to." Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Derek turned to the board. "You have two choices. You can either distance yourselves from this now and cooperate, or you can go down with her." The room erupted into chaos. Board members turned on Karen, demanding explanations. Homeowners whispered in shock. Karen, for the first time, looked truly afraid. Derek simply crossed his arms, waiting. He knew exactly what was coming next. Karen Whitman had spent years building her empire, bending the rules, silencing dissent, and lining her pockets under the guise of community service. She had believed herself untouchable, immune to consequences. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. 2 days after Derek's big reveal at the HOA meeting, the neighborhood woke up to the flashing red and blue lights of law enforcement vehicles lining the streets. FBI agents, along with local authorities, swarmed the HOA office, executing search warrants based on the evidence Derek had compiled. Residents gathered on their lawns, watching in stunned silence as agents carried out boxes of financial records, hard drives, and confidential files, all filled with proof of Karen's crimes. Inside, Karen sat behind her desk, arms crossed, her usual smugness replaced by a pale, tight-lipped expression. Across from her stood 2 FBI agents, one of whom was calmly reading her Miranda rights. "You have the right to remain silent," her hands balled into fists. "This is ridiculous. This is a misunderstanding," she hissed. But the evidence spoke louder than her words. Investigators had traced hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled into fake vendor accounts, only to be withdrawn by Karen and her closest board members. They had found email correspondence discussing fraudulent property flips, illegal fines, and how to cover their tracks. Worst of all, IRS agents were present, because in her greed, Karen had made the fatal mistake of not paying taxes on her stolen money. As the agents cuffed her hands behind her back, she finally snapped, "You can't do this to me. I am the HOA. I built this community." One of the officers simply replied, "Yeah? Well, now you can build your defense in court." The doors swung open, and Karen was marched outside, in handcuffs, in full view of the entire neighborhood. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Some people whispered in shock, while others smiled. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like it could breathe again. With Karen in custody, her loyal board members quickly realized they were in deep trouble. At first, they stuck, together, insisting on their innocence. But as investigators turned up more evidence, their loyalty crumbled. The HOA treasurer, a middle-aged man with sweat beading on his forehead, was the first to crack. I didn't know she was stealing that much money. She told us it was for community improvements." Another board member, the secretary, immediately lawyered up and started negotiating a deal. The vice president, Karen's right-hand man, flat out denied everything, only for his own signature to be found on fraudulent transactions. It didn't take long before everyone was scrambling to save themselves. And Karen? She was about to find out what it felt like to be betrayed. Within a week, formal charges were filed: wire fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud. Karen and her board members were facing serious federal prison time. The HOA was dissolved under a court order, and a new community association was formed, this time with actual transparency. Derek, standing on his front porch, watched as a "for sale" sign was placed in front of Karen's now seized mansion. It was poetic justice. Her own illegal foreclosures had come full circle. As neighbors came up to shake his hand, thanking him for exposing the truth, Derek simply smiled. Justice had been served. And Karen? She was headed for a new kind of gated community, one with bars. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like home again. With Karen and her corrupt board out of power, the remaining homeowners took swift action. A community vote was held, and a new HOA board was elected, this time filled with honest, well-meaning members who genuinely wanted to serve the neighborhood. One of their first actions? Refunding thousands of dollars in illegal fines. Residents, who had been bullied into paying for bogus violations, were shocked to find checks in their mailboxes, many in the thousands. Some homeowners had nearly lost their homes to Karen's schemes, and seeing justice served felt like a long overdue victory. At the next community meeting, The new HOA president stood before the crowd. "From now on, we serve the homeowners, not the other way around." For the first time in years, the room erupted in applause. Karen Whitman had spent years ruling over the neighborhood like a dictator. Now she was just another defendant in a long list of fraud cases. The media ate up the story. Headlines plastered across local news. HOA president charged in massive fraud scandal. Community reclaims power after years of HOA corruption. Karen's arrogant, condescending voice had once filled HOA meetings. Now the only place she would be speaking was in court. The once powerful woman pleaded not guilty but with overwhelming evidence, and her own board members testifying against her. Her fate was sealed. As she walked into the courthouse one morning, reporters swarmed, microphones in her face. "Karen, do you have anything to say about the charges?" For the first time in her life, Karen had no words. On a quiet evening, Derek Vaughn sat on his porch, sipping his coffee and watching the sunset. His home, the one they had tried to take from him, stood just as strong as ever. The neighborhood was peaceful again, free from Karen's iron grip. Kids played outside. Families enjoyed their yards without fear of petty fines or constant surveillance. Derek had spent his career fighting criminals, but this battle had been personal. He didn't need a badge to bring justice, just the determination to stand up for what was right. As he leaned back in his chair, he allowed himself a small smile. Justice had been served, and his home was finally his again. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.